I didn't have a music of my own that resonated with kind of my school friends, for a while. And Omanoi lived with us, which meant that there was a lot of Vietnamese around, which meant that there was a lot of Vietnamese music around, of kind of like both like the kind of Paris by Night and Asia and that kind of thing that my parents were listening to, like the like Elan and Tuấn Ngọc, that kind of stuff that my parents were more likely to listen to, but then also like the hardcore Cải Lương that my grandparents were listening to. So that was always running around the house.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over the world.
Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm really good, really good. What does it mean to be Vietnamese to you?
I would start out by saying that in a broad sense, I like to start from understanding that Vietnamese identity and being Vietnamese is a construction. Now, being a construction doesn't mean that anything is bad in and of itself, but just to say that when Vietnamese people, for example, say that Vietnamese people have been around for thousands of years and we fought China for thousands of years and fought the French and all those things. You didn't do that, right? So what we are saying is that we have made an active choice to put ourselves in continuity with particular people in the past, right? And that is a project of producing who you are as a person and who the network of people you care about are as well. So for me, being Vietnamese is about deciding and teasing out the parts of that history that have direct relevance to me and my life. Now, a lot of that has to do with family, right?
Yeah.
So for me, an important thing when it comes to talking about identity and about being Vietnamese is no one is Vietnamese in general. And in fact, people who talk about being Vietnamese as like in that general sense probably don't have access to, and I don't blame them ever, but like people our age and a little bit younger, you hear a lot of people say like I am Vietnamese in this general sense, right? And what they're trying to do is get access to being Vietnamese, but they don't have the details, and they don't have access to the details because they don't speak Vietnamese, because their parents didn't teach them Vietnamese, or didn't teach them the history or whatever. So I'm not blaming anyone in the equation, but for me, it was really important, for example, to know that my both sides of my family come specifically from like Haizung on one side and Hanoi on the other side. Right? Like that's specific on one level. That means that I speak with a back accent and a back accent from like before 54. All these things come together. When I visited Vietnam back in I think it's 2016 or so. Um, I was in Hanoi, and then I spoke, and I was trying to buy some gifts for some family members that we still have in Vietnam. And so I went to a wine shop, like a liquor shop, right? Like as you would, right? And I went in there and I bought some stuff and I talked to the lady, and she was like, "You have a Vietnamese accent from here, but not here from here now. It's like from here years ago." Like it and so for her, it connected me to even specifically the sound of Hanoi from from pre 54. And for me, those specificities is what being Vietnamese is about. There's no point to talk about being Vietnamese in general if you don't know where you're coming from, if you don't know what your connections are, then you should at least find something to connect to. Now, some people don't have those direct connections going back multiple generations, and they're as Vietnamese as anyone else. Like one person that I think about is in the Cải Lương world. There's Chi Tâm, the very kind of famous. He was married to Hung Lan for a while, and then but not famous Cải Lương singer in his own in his own world, right? But I believe that he is ethnic Chinese, right? And which a lot of a lot of people in the South are. But what that reminds me is that, like, there's nothing more South Vietnamese than singing Cải Lương music, right? Mm-hmm. But like a lot of the people in the industry and a lot of the people who in South Vietnam we care about as musicians are not that middle of the road Vietnamese kind of in an uncomplicated sense, right? Like you got Chi Tâm, who is who is at least part ethnic Chinese. You have um, let's I think of well, off the top of my head, I'm blanking right at this moment, but you get the sense. Um,
I have a question.
yeah, sure.
Why is it that the south of Vietnam has a lot of Chinese roots when you think of the north being bordering China should have much more Chinese roots, right? But
They have
like
Chinese roots in different ways. So the North has Chinese connections directly through kind of the border, right? So obviously, uh, if you go to like the northern parts of Minh Bắc Vietnam, so it's the north, like right along the border, those parts are like any border, very mixed. The people on either side are speaking Chinese or Vietnamese. You have people just north of the border who play Vietnamese instrument and play Vietnamese music, and you have people just south of the border who are really into Chinese things and speak Chinese, etc. Right? So there's a different kind of blending that happens there. What happened in the South, though, is Saigon, in particular, was a hugely diverse city because it was a port um, that has had history through a bunch of different empires, even before the Ging people, right? So they kind of modern day ethnic Vietnamese. And each of those groups brought in their own cultures, brought in people who lived there. And then you have all the different ethnic minorities in Vietnam. So you have Vietnam's kind of like already living in that geographical area, ethnic minorities. Then you've got people from across the rest of Southeast Asia, all the way to India, coming into the port right outside Saigon, right?
oh, got it.
So Saigon ends up having all these different groups, including where we now refer to like Chợ Lớn, that area, right? That area
Is there
ended up being
Chinatown?
where, yeah, it was Chinatown, and it just has stayed that way, like forever. Even like before the kind of like modern Vietnam's
Right.
version of Saigon.
It's always been. But then you go to
Yeah.
Bạc Liêu, Sóc Trăng, Cần Thơ, all of those regions have just a heavy, it's my family, my dad's side
Yeah.
came from that whole era. Um, you take 23andMe, these tests, and it'll point to so much ethnic Chinese in our blood.
Well, yeah, and that just goes to I don't know all the details. It's not my area of expertise, kind of like early Vietnamese history, but my understanding of it is that just goes to the fact that that's the way the Mekong Delta works,
Yeah.
right? Like you've got a big city at the mouth of the delta, and then you've got basically everyone else, everyone looking for opportunities, just working their way down, and and the Chinese of the time, they were there as businessmen, and they were there as tradesmen and etc. So of course they would have looked for opportunities further downstream and probably made started families and whatnot.
I want to ask you, what did you think about when you were growing up? Did you want to be a ethnomusicologist right out of the, growing up, or did you want to be in a rock band and you studied music? I mean, how did this all come about?
So I was born and raised in North Carolina, and part of and I was in Winston-Salem, actually. So Winston-Salem is not a Vietnamese heavy
How did they end
city.
up? How did your parents end up there?
Basically work. Anyone who knows the kind of geography of North Carolina relative to Vietnamese folks knows that Charlotte and Raleigh are the big centers, Greensboro to some extent, right? And those and Winston-Salem is just north, or it's just west of Greensboro and about an hour and a half north of Charlotte. So my mom was from her family had settled in the Charlotte area. My dad's family settled closer in the Chapel Hill, Raleigh area, and then they just kind of when my parents got married, they kind of converged on that area when my dad found work there. But in any case, we ended up. It wasn't as bad as, say, like I've talked to, going to Indiana University for grad school. I had a lot of Vietnamese friends in the Midwest, and that
Yeah.
situation is really different, right? In terms of your kind of disconnection from any other Vietnamese people outside of maybe the people who settled there with you. But growing up, there wasn't a whole bunch of Vietnamese community around. There were a few other families that we knew. The temple, of course, our family is Buddhist, so the temple was a way for us to be around a lot of Vietnamese things. But when you're young, you're not really thinking about, like, yeah, I really need to maintain some sense of Vietnameseness. You're just trying to fit in with other kids, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, my parents wanted us to, my sisters and I, just to study music from pretty early on, and it was up to me to pick out of a selection of classical Western instruments, and I played violin starting pretty early on.
Why did they expect you to play music? Did they have musical backgrounds themselves?
Not serious ones. My mom likes to sing. My dad never got the opportunity to study music formally, but he could pick some things on guitar, and he was always, he could always
Dabbling.
pick up any instrument. Yeah, he can dabble in any instrument, but he wasn't professionally trained in anything. And so there was a little bit of that. But I think mostly there's a in a I'll say that in a particular class of Vietnamese people, and I would say my parents were at the time kind of middle class ish, right? So, and my mom's family in particular was a pretty well educated family from the start, which what comes with that is this expectation of hitting certain kind of norms of both assimilation, but of education, right? Especially both sides of my family are from the north. Have you ever been to Hanoi and been to, like, the Temple of Literature? There's a certain idea of the relationship between class and education that comes from that part of Vietnam, right? And I think there's there's all these different ways that people think about how to be high class, how to be successful, how to reach, how to aspire, right? And part of that is in my family is a kind of a well-roundedness across the board, like văn võ song toàn, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, we did taekwondo growing up too. We did violin, taekwondo, and then we studied it, like all the time.
Can you
So that was
explain văn
basically
võ song toàn?
Yeah, so it's one of those lines that come from like kung fu dramas, right? Like martial arts serials, and literally means van as in the arts and literature, and then võ as in martial arts, as in like kung fu, song tuan, the harmonizing, coming together, and being balanced, right? So that was all, that kind of idea. I mean, my dad would put it that way sometimes.
Yeah.
But like, just a joke around. But the idea that the well-roundedness across music and across physical and kind of literary arts was an important kind of feature, which comes from kind of a Confucian history a little bit.
Yep. So you studied violin for how many years?
I started violin, I want to say around kindergarten, and I played all the way through college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so sat first chair in my high school orchestra, was less focused in college, and so moved between like first, second, third chairs, kind of bounced around.
And did you study music in college? That was your major?
Yeah, no, it wasn't my major. I continued to take lessons and as formal coursework while I was in school. I considered a minor, but ended up not going that direction because once I was in college, I was a pre-med biology BS major.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then at what point did you start picking up sort of our Vietnamese instruments?
So in college, I was lucky enough to be on a scholarship at Wake Forest University that allowed me to write up a grant proposal where the money was already set aside for me in the summers, as long as I could convince them that the thing that I was doing for the summer was valuable for myself and for society at large, then they would fund me to do a summer project. And basically, what I used that opportunity to do was spend all of my summers studying with Thầy Phạm Đức Thành in Montreal, Canada, every summer. So I would go up. The first few years, I stayed with a Catholic Vietnamese lady down the street from his house, and would live with her, and then take and take the tram over to to his house, and then like 2 or 3 times a week. That first year, I didn't go to his house as often, but by like the fourth year, I was living at his house. So
Wow. Can we backtrack a
yeah,
little bit? Like, you're playing violin all these years, and then
yeah.
what made you go to Montreal? Like, how did you find that connection, and what drew you to Montreal to this master?
Yeah. So I guess if we back up to high school, and going back to the earlier question, that was when questions of identity and how to navigate kind of spaces as a I guess I've in high school, and I think this is true in spaces where there's not enough Vietnamese people to matter, but like you end up navigating the world is figuring out what can my Asian body do in these spaces, right? Because like it's not like everyone else in the world thinking like, oh man, this guy's Vietnamese. They're just like, it's an Asian guy.
Yeah.
So you're trying to perform a version of yourself in high school, right? And everyone remembers high school. That can be true to yourself, but also be cool enough to like have friends, right? Um, and but I felt a certain kind of estrangement. Say, you mentioned rock music, and it's funny. Like I felt a certain estrangement from American popular culture, in part because my grandparents lived. My grandparents, my dad's side, so Omanoi, lived with us, which meant that there was a lot of Vietnamese around, which meant that there was a lot of Vietnamese music around, of kind of like both like the kind of Paris by night and Asia and that kind of thing that my parents were listening to, like the like Elan and Bun Ngọc, that kind of stuff that my parents were more likely to listen to, but then also like the hardcore Cải Lương that my grandparents were listening to. So that was always running around the house, which to some extent I didn't have a music of my own that resonated with kind of my school friends, like for a while, and and my siblings and I guess we all picked different directions. My youngest sister, she ended up going the K-pop direction, and she was really into K-pop way before the K-pop wave became super big. She was like, hang out with those kids. And then my other sister, so they're both younger than me, she ended up going more in a kind of a alternative rock direction, right? Like, and I ended up going in a hip hop direction, that thinking that like I wanted to ally myself with, at least in this kind of pseudo cultural way, with what I perceived at the time as a kind of the music of the underground, the music of the outsider, and so
Which
that
groups in
became,
hip hop were you into?
oh man, like going back that far. Early on, I really love Wu-Tang Clan.
Yeah.
Like really love Wu-Tang Clan, particularly the more lyrical minded, members. So like Ghostface, Jizza, RZA. I mean, they're all very lyrically minded, but I mean, I think those three kind of gives you the like if you know Wu-Tang Clan, like gives you the sense of like the kind of tongue twisteriness that I preferred, and like and then a number of like, and I think more kind of underground acts, like Atmosphere. I listen to them a lot.
I ask you all these questions because obviously I want to build up a context of your sort of musical journey, that sort of I want to kind of I have this like blank canvas about people, and people who sit as guests, to get to sort of, we get to see building blocks of, especially now in the musical context for you, you got really into hip hop, and that was sort of like what you identified with. And then now I begin to see where this leads to with our Vietnamese instruments.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is, I'm playing violin, and I'm a pretty high level violin player through high school, right? And eventually, you get to this point where, wow, Black folks have their music, and and more specifically, young Black people have their music,
Yeah.
right? And so you can ask yourself, what is my music? Because I enjoy, like what my parents are listening to, but it's not mine per se. I mean, like every kind of youth generation ends up developing its own,
Sound. Yeah.
sound, right? And so that wasn't for me. I the at the time, I think like C-pop was doing some interesting things, blending a lot with hip hop sounds, and
Yeah.
like I like that, but then that's still not
Ours,
us, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and especially like Hong Kong. Hong Kong Chinese culture specifically has had a lot of cross pollination with Vietnamese stuff, but in general, we still know it's not ours, right?
Yeah. The language is, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you watch Thuần Điêu Đại Hiệp and you like it, but you know
But it
it's
ain't,
not like
yeah,
ours.
it's not
Yeah.
ours. Yeah. You just know that it's not ours. Even the way
Yeah.
that's an interesting point that you bring up. And how do you know it's not ours? It's because you see the lips moving, and it's not ours. It's because it's all dubbed, spoken words that are, excuse me, dubbed over. So you immediately identify that what you're seeing is slightly not me. It's like off.
Yeah.
And then
yeah, exactly. And
our whole
all these things are really
existence is like
important.
that almost.
Yeah. I mean, all these things are really important. So like when I talk about things that are Asian things that are really crucial to my childhood, like Daisuke, right? Like anh hùng xạ điêu Thần Điêu Đại Hiệp, like all the Kim Jong novels, like all that stuff is really, really important to me as a young Vietnamese American trying to find spaces and media that I could consume that felt like it was mine. But at the end of the day, like that stuff comes from a different thread in history, right? It comes from a different cultural thread in general. The way the music sounds, I mean, there's always that funny way that people who dub, even without watching the mouth move, you get used to that. But there's a particular way of speaking Vietnamese that has a slight twang that we always joke about, is like the dub, voice, right?
Yeah.
So like you pick up on those things, and so that wasn't ours either. And eventually, this was, so I mean, we're talking about me as a teenager, so we're talking in the 90s then, right? Like Vietnam has just opened up, but of course our communities have all kinds of complications between each other. And honestly, popular music from Vietnam was behind anyway, right? So
what do you mean by that? It was behind.
In the very specific sense that technologically, in terms of production value, in terms of its ability to access both the technical and discursive aspects of kind of the world popular music industries, it was just cut off for so long. Just like literally
stunted.
Part of it, yeah, stunted by the Communist Party's choices about what sorts of music it would allow, stunted because it didn't acknowledge the fact that the South Vietnam had made lots of progress in popular music, in the 60s and 70s, which a lot of the music which had banned after the fact. In the 90s was when that was starting to become a thing again. Like in Vietnam, they were starting to figure out how to use synthesizers and use 8-tracks and stuff like that. But like, I mean, like that, they were just starting. So if you listen to pop music from Vietnam and you're from America and you're listening to like, Wu-Tang Clan, like immediately you realize that
there's a gap.
That there's a gap, and that it will not speak to you, right? even if your Vietnamese is was good enough to like appreciate it, and
So are you
that's also
saying,
assuming that you can get it. That's
yeah,
assuming
yeah.
you can access it, right?
Are you saying that from 75 to 95 for 20 years, the music in Vietnam was basically put on hold?
Obviously people have to have music, and obviously people had to negotiate the fact that the party made decisions about the way a music was to be circulated and the sorts of music that would be allowed to be circulated, right? People negotiated that fact and figured out ways to make music, but it can't, like, I mean, you can't deny the fact that during that time period Vietnam's economy was not going to be putting money to building out the music industry.
Yeah, of
Right? It just
course.
wasn't going to be what just wasn't going to
It's
be
not
what
a
it was
priority.
doing. Yeah, up until I would say the 90s, when basically the entire world was saying, yeah, this is like the dragon awakening, right? That somehow this economy, especially with with đổi mới and everything, right? The renovation policy, and economic renovation policy, like that was when Vietnam could say, "Hey, we're part of the world economy, and we should look like we're part of the world economy," and say put money into pop cultural things, right? Otherwise, pop culture happens regardless. I mean, Vietnam was making music, so and a lot of the music's good, but it's not good in like the aesthetic sense that a Westerner would listen to and be like, yeah, like that was totally made in a really high end studio, and like I can really bop to that, you know?
Yeah. When do you feel like it? Because I have my sort of time period in my head when it kind of like changed for me on a personal level. And it's when like Phương Thanh and Lam Chung and Dan Chung, all these pop stars were sort of emerging. I think it was like the late 90s or mid 90s. And you
Yeah,
would get this sense of like, it was like rock and roll, but it was like, because Phương Thanh has this very raspy rock and roll sound,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
and I felt like sort of that was for me the rebirth for the new generation. It just like, whoa, this is like there's a new sound coming out of Vietnam that's liberating.
Yeah. So as a as an ethnomusicologist and historian of music, I totally get where you're coming from, right? I'm a little bit younger to have felt that at the time in the same way that you probably did. Maybe by like, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
So yeah. So like, be, and by that I mean, to me, the music that my parents, one, I wasn't myself getting music from Vietnam at the time.
Yeah.
So then the music that my parents were bringing from Vietnam would then be like the kind of ballads being sung. What I remember from the time is like all the singers basically, like the ones my parents liked were just the ones like from like the Hanoi Conservatory, and they all sang in this very like perfect like ballad way, but they all sounded the same, right? And and so I didn't myself get a picture of the rest of Vietnam's kind of pop music industry until later. And now, as having studied it and like thinking about it now, like when like let me just give you an example. So like Sidan comes over in the mid '90s himself, and he before he comes over is one of the kind of rising hot kind of musicians of the youth generation of Vietnam, and he's just starting to use using be able to program tracks and do that kind of digital stuff, right? He's just starting to do that kind of thing in Vietnam. So like I know that the kind of production value and the kind of sounds that you would associate, say, with young people's dance music, um, were starting to become a thing. But for me personally, I didn't really get a sense of that until probably the late 2000s. In part because like I heard that stuff then and I was like, it ain't for me.
Yeah.
And then kind of checked out for some time. And even then, I think if you're looking at, for example, the the kind of pop dance, that kind of particular kind of EDM sound that's really popular now. I think that's the one time where you can say very definitively that Vietnam's production values beaten
Increase.
beaten the diaspora's
Yeah.
ability to create that kind of music, right? Like the diaspora is not making
New
electronic
music.
dance music. It's not making
Yeah.
dance music, definitely. I mean, it's making new music, but it's not making dance music,
Yeah.
right?
But I mean,
And
I would argue the diaspora is making new music. They're just redoing songs from the past, right? Up until that
yeah,
point. I
yeah,
mean, how much
yes.
new musical forms were we doing here, in the US? Hardly anything new.
So I mean, I think whichever artists we had making new things um, have basically gone back to Vietnam by now, right? Like if you think about the artists, uh, I think about Duy, for example, right? Like if you think about someone, he's more in the kind of acoustic singer songwriter kind of
Yeah.
mold, right? But
Hmm.
like he was a young diasporic Vietnamese person making music that was new, that sounded different, right? That spoke to the sensibilities of people overseas, right?
Yeah.
I would say generally speaking, um, and his music was popular, but uh, now he's gone back to Vietnam, right? For the most part, and he's trying to get people in Vietnam to recognize that his music is and was good, and
Yeah.
that's the direction that he's decided to move. Which, that's there's nothing wrong with that. But just as far as then there's a certain brain drain that has happened in that sense from the diaspora when it comes to kind of creative new work. Now, I think there are a lot of young people still involved in the diasporic music industries. Um, I'm thinking about and like particularly in like in the cộng đồng sense, right? Like a connected to other Vietnamese people sense, not just artists who happen to be Vietnamese, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah. You're talking about like Coachella people, or artists that play mainstream or alternative rock,
but
uh
see, I mean that crowd doesn't connect to cộng đồng in the same way,
not at
right?
all. Yeah.
I it's funny. I'm writing my dissertation right now, and was writing about the early days of the UNAFSA conference, the Union of North American Vietnamese Student Associations, and oh, one of the early conferences. I think I don't remember the year. I think it's 2006. So yeah, UNAFSA 3 is in 2006. And at this conference, they have a group of kids from LA, kind of Orange County area, um, and called Thomas's Apartment. You
Yeah.
remember them,
UCLA kids.
right? Yeah.
I
So you
think
remember them.
Nam Tran and Thomas and a
Yeah.
bunch of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those guys. So they were there, and part of the reason that they were there was that over the past like 2 3 years before that, they were starting to make it big in the Kono, right?
Yeah.
And then I think pretty like a year after that, like like they had won the SBTN talent show, and then like all the Vietnamese newspapers. The other only reason I know all this is that I actually very recently did all the research just to see like how big they had made it. But like they like Bao Người Việt was like writing about them and talking about how they were the future of rock for Vietnamese people and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But as you're saying, their dream is like the kind of Coachella crowd. I mean, they didn't make it that far, not because they weren't talented musicians, it's just that it wasn't in the cards for them. But like to the extent that they were in Gyeongdong, it was just that they happened to like be from the West
Yeah.
Coast, and their families were all here and they're supporting them and everything. But the music they made, they mostly wrote it in English. There was some general thematic things that occasionally linked up with Vietnamese identity, but largely just kind of teenage and young adult angst and those
Yeah.
sorts of
Yeah.
and loves and those sorts of things, right? So that's one of the kind of problematic things if you're thinking about Vietnamese popular music in the diaspora is like who is gonna make it and who are you gonna make it for? Like on a basic level, is it going to be in Vietnamese? Because if it's going to be in Vietnamese, then no one's listening to it. So then is your audience going to be in Vietnam? Are you going to be a musician in America making music for Vietnam? Well, if you're
Yeah, you're
Vietnamese,
screwed. I think if you're a Vietnamese American kid growing up in the 90s or 2000s and you were trying to make music, you and if you wanted to do it for the Coachella crowd, I mean, it's hard. It would have been very difficult for you to cross over to mainstream. Like, Voodoo Soul.
yeah,
Yeah, Voodoo Soul had chops.
yeah, do sound good.
Sounded really good, but somewhere in the mix between the growth of the diaspora, the musical scene there, and Vietnam, it's like it's kind of like where did he fit in, But
Yeah,
but he was good. He's a good friend of mine actually, and I loved what he did. But where can you connect with that? Because the lyrics need to connect with you, and the music and the musicality needs to all like come together so you can feel it. And it was just like it just never connected with
yeah.
the whole
I,
body of Vietnamese people.
I mean, the truth is that there was and will continue to be, I think, for a long time, a disjunction between young diasporic Vietnamese people and where they can get a source of Vietnamese popular music if they want it. And that is partially historical. Well, it's all historical, right? I would say it's all historical, but some of it's cultural. Some of it has to do with kind of broader things happening in the world. But a lot of people want to compare to say K-pop or to J-pop or to basically everywhere else in Asia. Like heck, my wife's Indian, so Bollywood music is big, right? Uh, and so we always want to sit around and think, hey, how come we can't have that? Well, part of the problem is like if you want to have that, that requires connecting with the homeland in a way where the two sides can nourish each other artistically, economically, socially, etc. Right? Like Korean people are really tight with their Koreanness, right? Like they can go to Korea, they can go to Seoul, and they can and they can enjoy Seoul without worrying about their distance from it as a political entity, as a historical entity,
Yeah,
etc.
never thought
Right?
about that. You're right.
I mean, unless they go to North Korea, but
exactly. Yeah, our parents are still the previous generation is still hung up on even being friendly to the country, Vietnam. And it's still something that we kind of as Vietnamese American children need to we need to break free of that at some point, because the people in Vietnam are not thinking about that for sure, right?
Yeah, they're just not worried about it.
No, they're existing and they don't give a rat's ass. I mean, it's like 90 something million of them just doing their art, doing their work, making their movies, making their music. And here we are kind of like, I feel like for me, I can speak for myself, music wise, I mean, I'm still trying to find out where I can connect musically in terms of Vietnamese music, and it's difficult.
Yeah. So what you end up doing is various kinds of either ideological compromise or just making do with what you have, right? So as a young person, I mean, to some extent, I'm just like, well, I guess I'm just gonna listen to Sue Boy and listen to like who's big right now. Big Fung is big right now. Like everyone loves Big
Huawei.
Fung. Yeah, like Huawei, but like like so I mean I do listen to the music from Vietnam right now, and I think that's for me personally, consistently listening to kind of young people's popular music from Vietnam has been a thing that's only happened for me consistently in the past, I'd say 3 or 4 years. Like before that, I would like pop in, see how they doing. Oh, sound pretty good, and I would
Checking
back,
in,
and come back out. But like these days is where I can say like, all right, Spotify, play my chill Vietnamese R&B
but do you
playlist, and I listen to it like on the regular.
do you play it with a researcher's mindset, or do you play it with an individual's mindset to enjoy it? and you're driving in the car and you're just like cruising to this, Vietnamese
I
music?
am both, man. I mean, like, I think it's hard to say that like I'm like listening to like Quang Dao Gabong and I'm like not just listening to that as a researcher, right? I mean, that song's hilarious regardless, and it bumps. And like if I'm listening to that song and I'm riding in my car, I ain't doing it as a researcher. I just like that song,
Yeah.
which is amazing that a person like me, born and raised in the States, can have that experience with Vietnamese music. I mean, I think that is
That's a beautiful thing.
it's a big move, right? Right? And that's not to say that the things that are happening in the community here doesn't have value. So I think one of the important things that I always want to remind people about is that the Vietnamese government did us dirty when it came to the music of South Vietnam before 75. Like you cannot deny that. It'd be like if like the Germans took over in the UK and then like destroyed like the Beatles catalog. I mean, like the timeline doesn't work out, but like it
Yeah.
has the same kind of resonance, right? Uh, and and the problem there is you I mean they basically banned everything. So and these days it's opened up enough that as long as the song doesn't directly mention war, as long as it isn't clearly from the perspective of South Vietnamese soldiers or the South Vietnamese Republic, then like as long as it's loosey goosey and kind of blurry enough, they'll let it slide, right? But that was only recent, and there's still situations where you will see a song in the past year go back and forth in terms of the government's permission to allow it, and even when the national government lets a song through, I've seen cases in the past year or two where local governments in certain towns, especially in the north, where there yes, some towns are still pretty pro the communist revolution, right? So in those places, you see them go a little bit overboard on banning a lot of the music as well. Like that's true. That's a historical reality, which means that for whatever else it was doing, the diasporic community had to be the repository for maintaining some of the music. Now, I think the diaspora has to reckon with the fact that they are discovering right now that people in Vietnam were doing the same thing. that they were, for a while they were the only ones doing it, and they had to do it because there was no connection to Vietnam. I think these days you're finding like, man, there's like dumpster divers in Vietnam looking for like old records and like piecing things together. Sometimes the folks in Vietnam these days have a more complete idea of the
Mhm.
musical culture in the 60s than a lot of us do. Like I mean, I'm talking like people like our age even, right? Like like
Yeah,
like they're going
absolutely.
through and like and and um and they hate that the government bans XYZ song, right? So that's something that I think especially people like the first generation has to deal with. Like I'm cool with it. Like to me, it makes total sense. It got banned. You know what happens when people ban things is
It
that
gets more popular. Yeah.
yeah, people
There's
are
added
like
layers to things. Yeah.
yeah. So I think the diaspora had a tendency, in part because there's no connection other than I remember my parents would or my dad especially would send the occasional letter back to Vietnam in like the 80s and 90s, right? And that was the best you could do. But since then, we've reconnected and we've realized that the struggle was alive in Vietnam as well. That people kept the music alive there as well, and that it's more complicated than like everything coming. All of the cultural production coming out of Vietnam is made by the party, right? It's not like that,
Yeah. You
and that's
ever
something that we have to reckon with.
study and this is going to be just a weird tangent, but I have to ask it. Have you ever studied why European disco new wave got so big in our community in the diaspora?
Um, some people have done the research into this, and I haven't done it in super detail.
But just like a quick
Yeah,
story, yeah.
I think there are a couple threads that are happening at the same time. So one, there was a connection, even no matter how tenuous, with people in Vietnam. In particular, people were still coming over as refugees up through the 90s, right? I mean, there's still people coming from Vietnam. I mean, I mentioned Sidan, for example, right? It's like dude comes, I think, I don't remember the exact year, but it's mid 90s, right? And and so they bring with them a particular sensibility about music. And one of those things was that Vi- in Vietnam, they were more familiar with European New Wave than they were with the American French New Wave. So you had that happening on one end. On the other end, in the diaspora itself, even though by the 90s, most of the production of music in the diaspora was centralized around Orange County, right? It's still large chunks of it were still in Paris and had historical connections to Paris and to the rest of Europe. So then you had that thread of kind of music coming in as well, right? So you had connections to Vietnamese artists who were still working or had worked and lived in Europe itself, particularly in and around Paris. Then you had people coming from Vietnam, kind of new blood, who were more familiar with European dance music than they were with American dance music. And then these people were then becoming the producers and music arrangers for Asia and Twinga and everybody, right? So those things come together. And then I think this, so that stuff is historical, but not on my kind of conjectural level.
Yeah.
I think that's happening at the same time. Then Vietnamese people, kind of just like, like I was saying about myself, we're always trying to find a way to make the thing our own, right? And so in America, American New Wave is American New Wave, but you could just, I mean, we definitely in the 90s, we definitely also just covered American New Wave songs, right? There's plenty of those as well. But I think another thing is like showing and proving that you had a different sensibility about the world, that you had access to something of that your average American did not have access to, right? That we were cosmopolitan in a different way than maybe your average American music consumer. So then that's happening, I think, at the same time, either consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, because a lot of us couldn't. Well, it depends. I mean, it was a very clear line of demarcation between The Cure, Depeche Mode, Joy Division,
Exactly.
New Order, versus fancy,
And Modern Talking,
Modern Talking, Bad Boys Blue,
yeah.
CC Catch. It was very clear. But I and my brother were old enough to really enjoy both of them. The British New Wave or American New Wave versus the German or Italian, sort of like very different identities. And it was almost like, okay, well, if you listen to that British side of New Wave, then it's just a completely different mindset. And Italian or European disco is different.
Well, so you were feeling it at the time, like
I was feeling both. I was feeling both of it.
So for you, when you like, what was the kind of existential feeling like of the two? Did it feel like you were more European when you were listening to like CC Catch?
No, that's a really good question. I felt more Vietnamese when I was attached to Modern Talking, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Yeah. I mean, that's part of being
that's
Vietnamese.
Like the difference in and of itself is sometimes enough. This is me as a semiotician speaking. Sometimes the difference is a signifier you want rather than the specific thing, right? You just want to signify that or represent that the thing you're doing is different, and it doesn't need to matter what the difference is based upon, right? Because you're trying to reconcile something in yourself. You already feel different, right? So you're trying to find music that will speak to your difference, and sometimes that's and as we've said before, the music that speaks to our difference isn't available in Vietnamese or for Vietnamese audiences.
Yeah, but I mean, I would even simplify it even more, because as I think back to being 14 or 18 or 15, I wasn't thinking that complex. My thinking was very simple, and it was just like when you heard sort of the British New Wave, it just brought a different sort of feeling. Yeah, it was just much more, ironically, much more American. And then you listen to the
Yeah,
European disco, which was also called New Wave. It gave you this sort of Asian sensibility because all of
yeah.
your elders were
I
listening to it.
I feel like the synthesizer was a really important part of that. Like the particular way continental Europe uses the synthesizer during that period just sounds different to my ear, right? Like the and I haven't like sat down and really like analyzed it, but I mean I just compare like modern talking to the Cure, and like
Yeah, it's
the
very
sound is completely different.
it's very different though. I mean, Erasure to me would probably be the what is right in the middle that shares so much
Mhm.
of the British New Wave and then the European New Wave. They
Yeah,
have very similar. Yeah, I mean, we can get into music theory all day long, but
that's his own thing, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's his own. But let's go back to when you started going on Montreal to study Danbao.
So, um, so then I guess the way we got here was basically to say that I was looking for a way to access the virtuosity, the skill, the talent of Vietnamese music, that to my mind at the time as an 18-year-old matched the way I was playing a violin. And to me, I'd watched Tay Phạm Đức Thành play on Paris by Night. It was pretty clear to me that he was a very different creature than everyone else around him, and yet he was playing for the pop songs, right? So like I think there was something to that as well. That I mean, if anyone looks at my musical output, like quickly realizes that I like to mix it up. That I like playing danbo and popular idioms. So I think the fact that he did that at the time spoke to me, despite the fact that his playing, even for someone who doesn't know anything about the music, clearly comes from a deep reservoir of like historical and cultural knowledge. You can't play the way he plays
You
without
don't know.
studying, a certain way.
What do you mean by that? Can
So
you kind of like break that down? Because
yeah,
that's a really interesting topic. Like, just because somebody plays a certain way, how do we interpret the context that they know all this knowledge and information?
so let me try to not get too deep into the technical part of it, but I'll just say that, um, for example, Thầy Thành, his background is in nhạc chèo, so Northern Vietnamese opera. So hát chèo. And in fact, he started out playing drums, like so chèo drums, before he started playing danbo. What that means is in his mind, there is a sense of rhythm
Hmm.
from chèo music. And chèo music rhythm is a extraordinarily complex rhythm to understand, to get into, to immerse yourself in, and to have that sense of rhythm requires, as he did, to
Playing
be
it.
in it since the age of 4, right? Like I mean, like he's been playing it since he was a kid, and so that's what I mean. And it's that people that the way Vietnamese people have traditionally learned music has involved, a pedagogical system, a way of learning that requires observation and continuous repetition of, and in that regard, it's very similar to playing classical music. Like you're just continuously
Yeah.
playing this line until like you play it like you assume the way Baroque people played it, right? Um, and so the same thing happens in Vietnamese traditional music, and in that sense is why I mean like it's clear when you listen to classical music, it's clear when you listen to Shostakovich, to Bach, to whoever, right? That they are drawing from a deep reservoir of cultural understanding of their understanding of how
Yeah.
music works, and if you listen to a very good Jiao singer, or to any other genre from the north, like gachu or like gachu hadvan or any of those genres, a person who's really good will give you that same kind of feeling. And the same thing with the South, right? If you listen to Dangkatatu, like a really good Gailung singer or anything like that, they will give you the sense that the sounds coming from them, either as a musician or a singer, are, if not a repetition of something from before, then at least it rhymes with the past,
Yeah.
right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
And so that's what I wanted to be able to do, to say I'm an adept at the violin now. I am able to speak the language of classical music at a high enough level that I'm singing the top of this orchestra. I don't really plan on being like like a Yo-Yo Ma type, right? But I know what it would take to move into that direction. Like, but why is it that I don't know how to access the same sorts of worlds, kind of intellectual artistic worlds in Vietnamese context? So that's where becoming a danbo player became something that I wanted to do. And that's how my teacher took it, because basically that first year we did it like I was going up to the mountains and studying from like a grandmaster, right? Like um, and so my in fact my parents went with me so that they could formally hand me off to my teacher, just as you would do in the old days. um, and that was just the first year. Obviously they didn't have to do it after that, because then we had our own relationship to build upon. But it was important to them that we did it that way, and I think he valued the relationship more because we did it that way. And
So wait a minute. So there's
yeah.
this little boy, or teenager, that goes into
Yeah.
this man's house. I mean, for the summer, right? And I mean, your parents hand you off, and I mean, so is it understood that you're going to be practicing alongside this man daily for what, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours a day? Doesn't the guy have to work? I mean, how does this work in modern Montreal times?
Okay, so I mean, he is a musician. He's a professional musician. He had won like top danbo awards in Vietnam multiple times before moving to Germany and then over to Canada. So his time was devoted to teaching students, and to recording for Twinga whenever they asked, or etc. Right. So we set it up that he was free in the summer, and that first year, I think I probably went to his house probably 3 or 4 times a week for 2 or 3 hours at a time. And that was good enough because I just needed to learn how to play the instrument technically at the beginning, right? He at the time he had started doing videos for you to teach yourself how to play, so I had already gotten those from him, and so I had the basics down. And as a violin player, the kind of basics of getting a good sound, getting pitch, those kind of things I could pick up pretty quickly. But then the kinds of things that have to do specifically with Vietnamese music, the modalities of Vietnamese music, and what I mean by that, in music, you've got scales, and those scales are attached to certain pitches. Well, those pitches are very different in Vietnamese. I mean, people sometimes will just say, "Oh, Vietnamese music is pentatonic," and just offhandedly. Not technically. Like, Vietnamese music is pentatonic in certain certain genres of Vietnamese music have modes that are pentatonic. Even those pentatonic modes have pitches that can fluctuate between different,
Right.
like higher or lower. And one of my early struggles was figure out how to not hear Western sounds while I was learning how to play.
Wow.
So my teacher would constantly say, like, that sounds like a perfect C, but it's too sharp for Hơi Samak, or for like Hơi Vọng Cổ, or whatever it was that I was trying to figure out at the time. And we alternated between studying really traditional repertoire and pop songs. Pop songs are easier. Like the pop songs, if you get it mostly right and you just kind of play it up for the emotion, like I think that first year I could play Long Mea well enough to make my mom cry. But
Yeah.
like, but I remember at the end of that year, he asked me like, well, what do you really want to learn? And I was like, well, thầy, my grandparents really love Gai Lung, and so what I'd like to do is learn vọng cổ. I'm gonna learn how to play vọng cổ. So for anyone who's not familiar with that, that's the main song. Whenever people kind of do like the long thing, and then people clap, and then they fall into the song. Right, that's vọng cổ.
Is it equivalent to an aria in Italian opera?
It starts as an aria, but vọng cổ itself is very rhythmic. So it's kind of is, but I mean, it happens so many times. Like the structure of vọng cổ is something that I don't know. Do we have time to go over the structure of vọng cổ? It's
why not?
Okay.
This is...
So like back in the 20s, there was a song written, and at the time it was in this kind of new medium, but it was called Zako Hoài Lan. And Zako Hoài Lan was super popular, like, and ended being played on the radio everywhere.
This was a song?
A song.
Okay.
Zako Hoài Lan.
What year was this? And where?
Back down in around Bạc Liêu area. So in
the south. Okay.
In the south. In the
Delta.
South, in the Delta. I want to say 28, but don't quote me on the exact year. It's in the 20s. But in any case, this song becomes super popular, and so all of the kind of traditional Southern musicians are playing it, right? Yeah, it's basically it's like everyone's covering it, right, all the time.
Yeah.
And so everyone gets really good at playing it, and so they start screwing around with it. One of the first things they do with it is it was originally written in Hơi Bắc, which is a kind of a happy mode, like a major key basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then people started switching it over to Hơi Nam, and then making it what is basically the equivalent of a minor key, so making it sound sadder.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, like the feeling is the same as changing from major to minor key.
Okay.
Right. So they did that first. And then they started embellishing it more, and they started adding different lyrics. So they would just swap out new lyrics whenever they did their
version.
Their version of it, right? Basically the equivalent of now Gai Lung shows, right? So, but one of the things they did was then they stretched it out, the timing, the tempo of it. They slowed it down by half, and they stretched everything out, and they sang it that way for a while. So it's a little both sadder and slower. Okay. Now the original, so let's say that song was was in one tempo. They basically halved the tempo and had it run twice as long. Then they did that again, probably around, I would guess, the 40s would be my guess. Like, is when that starts to happen. I'm not really sure, but so let's say the song's in duple. Basically, if one measure was 2 beats, that measure is now 4 beats,
yeah.
And then they did it again, so that measure was 8 beats. They did it again to make that measure 16 beats, and then at the height of Gai Lung's popularity, they stretched out to those 2 beats to become 32 beats, and the original notes were just goalposts for you to hit every 8 beats or so,
yeah.
Which is why Gai Lung now you can hear everyone playing whatever the hell they want for 8 beats, and then like everyone coming together hit the same note, because that note is the original note from Zako Hoài Lan. But then so that's why when you said like, is it a song? Well, complicated. Vọng cổ now is a structure of 6 of kind of 6 verses, I'll say, and each of those verses is basically played so that every 8 beats, everyone has to play the same note, and the singer has to land on the same note. But everything else is more or less freestyle within a mode that was based on Hơi Nam Hơi Oan, or basically the sad modes of Southern music, but now it kind of is its own kind of vọng cổ mode, which is like those two, but it's slightly different.
Okay.
In part
Is anybody else studying this except you? Like, how do we like, how do I know like what you're telling me? And I believe you. I'm just
Yeah, no,
sort of
yeah.
building some infrastructure in my head here. Is there other people that are studying this in Vietnam or the United States or
In
diaspora?
in Vietnam, there's lots of people. I mean, like, but it's all in Vietnamese, right? So
Yeah.
like, no one's gonna be sitting there explaining it to you. In the U.S., the main scholar who's really studied Southern Vietnamese music this way, I would say, is Alexander Cannon. He studied with he studied Dan Chang with Nguyễn Bao, and in Saigon for a while, and it's really connected with that with the Dun Gat world. So, but his research is more sociological, more ethnomusicological in the cultural anthropology sense. So he doesn't sit around like doing the kind of music theory angle a lot. The kind of heyday of this sort of what I'm describing now as a kind of that sort of research was in the time period of giáo sư tiến sĩ Trần Văn Khê, um, and he so he I think did his dissertation at Sorbonne, um, taught in Paris for a very long time. In sometime in the 2000s, I forget exactly, moved back to Vietnam. Actually, was one of his last visitors before he went back to Vietnam. I think I visited him that summer before I went back to Vietnam.
So there are this
2006
branch of
or something.
ethnomusicology in Vietnam and the diaspora exists.
Yeah, but it's not in English. Like, it's very large. I mean, so Jen Renke writes a dissertation and some books that are very detailed about the way Vietnamese modalism works, about the way Vietnamese music theory works. But that's,
and he writes it in
French.
Vietnamese.
But that stuff's in French, right? So and he has stuff in Vietnamese too, but like his stuff is in French and in Vietnamese. There is not someone who is all in on doing this sort of work, as far as I know, in English, other than Alexander Cannon.
And is the music still alive, or is it on its way out? Is it fading out?
So there's not one Vietnamese music, right? One genre. So it depends on which genre you're talking about, and let me give some examples. So, like, royal court music, nhạc cung đình, will survive because it's really popular to be played in Hue whenever the tourists come by. Which means there's always going to be somebody playing it. But what it means is that there's no development of it. Like, they're just playing the repertoire as it sits. Like nhạc cung đình Hue sits in a certain way, for example. Whereas like nhạc cải lương continues to be developed, continues to kind of grow and change. And average people our age living down the Delta like to sing cải lương songs. I mean, it's normal, right? So the get that cải lương, vọng cổ, that kind of stuff, that still kind of survives in its own kind of way, though it is not as popular as it used to be, obviously. And then there's different other genres in the North. One of my favorite genres of the North is Gachru, which is related to ngâm thơ, so basically reciting poetry to music, right? And but Gachru was associated with the high class folks and to the aristocracy, which meant that when like the land reform happened in North Vietnam and you were killing aristocracy, one of the things you did before you even did that was to stop them from playing their music. So Gachru went underground. It's still around, and actually one of the funny things is that it's now a UNESCO World Intangible Heritage, which means Vietnam pours a lot of money and resources into keeping Gachru alive now, despite the fact of, for decades basically pushing it underground. They did the same thing to Hát Văn, what we sometimes call Linh Dong, right? So like spiritual possession music, which is I really like it because it's some like the most fun, upbeat music in the kind of traditional repertoires. But that, as the old kind of Marxist saying goes, is like religion's the opiate of the people. So they got rid of spiritual possession. And so then it hung around. There's a lot of really hilarious Hát Văn songs that are like about Ho Chi Minh. So like all the singers like, well, how am I going to keep singing Hát Văn now? I guess I was singing about Dear Leader, and that's how it survived, basically.
Yeah.
So I mean, everything survives in its own way, and some things have survived more successfully than others, I guess is my point.
What do you do with on a applied practical application level with the knowledge that you accumulate as an ethnomusicologist?
Beats me, man. Not, I mean, this is a struggle. The truth of the matter is, I don't think our community is equipped to put the sorts of energy and financial resources into the kind of cultural programming that would say put my expertise to work. And I mean, it's very frankly speaking, right? So what I have to do is basically be kind of a hustler about it, be kind of entrepreneurial about it, um, and find ways to make it
Monetize.
interesting. Monetize. I'm not monetizing much lately, but I have to have that kind of mentality, right? So even if I'm not making money of it, if I want to like kind of spread it and proselytize about the music or anything like that, I still have to think in those terms. I have to think in like the terms of social media. I have to think of in the terms of marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Because our community is not set up like for me to just sit here and like research traditional music and like how it affects the diaspora, right? Like,
Yeah.
or even to write up about it, which is not equipped to do those things. Ironically, I mean, like, I think in the kind of in the world of Western art music, in the world of people who dig kind of world music as a category,
Yeah.
there's some thing there, but then you're not doing it for Vietnamese people. You're doing it for largely rich white people.
Yeah.
I mean, like, right? So
That's the truth. Yeah.
So for example, like Vanessa Van Va, she's a danjeng player, danbo player, exquisite musician. I don't and I don't want to say anything, and I don't mean to say anything bad about her because I think she's awesome. But she works in the in part because she came out of a conservatory background herself. She works in that kind of art music sphere, and she also does a bunch of work in the community to spread Vietnamese music and get people to enjoy it and understand it. So that's why I don't want to say anything like I don't want to say like she's doing anything bad. She's doing what she needs to do, right? But the truth of the matter is, the where you find success, where you're going to find a reputation for yourself, is in that world. And then as a side effect, you can bring that back down to the community after the fact, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think you're going to make it in the community first. And then, I mean, like, my teachers basically went back to Vietnam. So just, I think he still lives part of the time in Toronto these days, but he spends a lot of time in Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, I really value the work that you do because it's if you don't do it and if you don't record it, nobody will. We talk about this quite often on the show here, that the history of certain segments of the population in Vietnam, both on a diaspora level and back in Vietnam in certain parts of the different decades, it's gone. It's gone. I was talking about the sort of the political era of 1954 to 1975 of the South, that sort of that structural government and how things were kind of ran. Where does that exist? How can you find it when all the guys that kind of ran that era fled? They left the country. They went everywhere across the world. They never really, I don't know if did somebody record the things that went on during that period, but as I'm talking to the elders, in their 80s and 90s now, they're saying that kind of that period, there's a lot of things that happened, but where are the South Vietnamese voices of that era today? Where can you find archival notes or books on it?
So there are scholars working in these areas. I guess on the practical level of where would you find this stuff as a researcher, there have been attempts to archive a lot of newspapers from the period. That's I have used that stuff myself. It's incredibly valuable just to get a sense of like
Yeah.
what was going on at a certain moment, like of how different. I mean, when we hear like the first generation talk about the freedom of South Vietnam, which is a contentious thing. It's complicated how free different things, how free things were for different people and whatnot. What they will bring up to you is one, the freedom of the press, and two, the freedom of music, right? Musical expression.
Right.
And the reason the freedom of press is brought up is because there were a fuck ton of newspapers at the time. Like there were just a bunch of newspapers across a range of left wing to right wing, to mainstream, kind of middle centrist, and all of them were vying for the attentions, basically, of the Saigon intelligentsia and like the kind of just Saigon population in general, right?
Yeah.
And what you get from that is a pretty good sense. I mean, you have to filter it through the understanding that these people are trying to get your views the same way you have to filter like social media and be like,
today,
like they're trying to capture your eyeballs, or they're trying to do the same thing. They're always trying to do the same thing. It's just accelerated now. But like the same impulse is there. So you have to kind of filter for that. But once you do filter for that, you get interesting views about different aspects of Vietnamese culture during those time periods. So people are doing that work. People are looking at 5475. And scholars here in America are doing that work. When it comes specifically to the music of that time period, I think that kind of stuff actually is not happening in the academy. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to do, whether I don't know how long I'll stay in academia and in what capacity once I finish my dissertation, one of the things that I'm trying to do is to insert into the picture of Vietnam 5470, South Vietnam 5475, a sense of the music as something vibrant, as something that was multifaceted, as something that real people were engaged in making, and that is in direct continuity with the music that that we listen to now, and sometimes we feel is a little bit old school, a little bit dusty, right? But I think that music, and that's why I mean, like outside the academy, where that stuff gets preserved is in kind of the hearts of fans in their own personal archives, etc. I don't know if you like watch like any of like the local programming, Vietnamese programming here, but like Jimmy Nhật Ha, who's roughly my age-ish.
Yeah, I love him.
Maybe a little younger. Yeah,
I think he's doing great work.
Yeah, I mean that kid is a repository. Of
he knows everything. I am so impressed by him. Shout out to Jimmy. I watch his stuff and you're like, you really start to wonder how much preparation he did before, or is this something that he's always sort of like followed and it's become him?
This is who Jimmy is. Like,
have you met him?
Yeah, like I am not super great friends with him. I'd like to spend more time with him, but like I know him, and we always have great conversations, and the things we talk about are like this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I would love to work with him more, because I feel like what I bring in terms of cultural analysis, he brings an equal weight in terms of just sheer archival knowledge, but in his head, right? It's in his head.
It's insane.
That's the crazy thing. Like he also has materials, so that's the cool thing, right? Like he keeps all these things, and I think Jimmy's a sweet guy, and so he's always talking to these elders, always getting interviews from them, and they love him. And I think to his credit, he deserves that love. He deserves that admiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he deserves that trust, right? Like, I mean, the Vietnamese community here in Little Saigon, particularly the artistic community, got hit by COVID pretty fast and pretty hard. I felt like constantly, sometimes they didn't even say it was COVID. They just, you would just hear about Vietnamese singers, artists, musicians dying every couple of weeks, like someone big, right? And no one ever said it was COVID, but like it was a big deal. And one constant in that was Jimmy. Jimmy was like always like, yeah, so and so is in the hospital. We are checking up on that guy.
Wow.
I think I think I think Anquan was sick, and like Jimmy like called up in the hospital and just made sure that he was fine, and then like told us all about it after the fact. Dude is on top of that because I mean I think that's the thing. Like 54 through 75 as a musical moment, there's still people alive from that period, right? And then also there's the people from the period right after that who were carrying their legacy, right? So one person that I've gotten to know over time is Chukho, right?
Asia.
Formerly of Asia, now devoting his time basically completely to SBTN, right? And one thing that I really value in him is he always took the time to kind of doubt to develop young talent. Now, some people will argue with the fact that he develops the young talent to play golden oldies.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is the dude cares about young people, and he has always cared about young people. And so he has cared about them enough to want to preserve that era of music for their sake, even if they don't want it.
Or even if they don't know that they
yeah, exactly. And I think that's been an invaluable kind of effort, and it's an effort that doesn't get you profits. At the end of the day, you and I may not sit down all the time to listen to nhạc vàng, bolero, or nhạc tiền tiến or any of that stuff on a regular basis, right? I do more these days because of research, but like
I grew up with that stuff in my parents and uncles, but I don't listen to it today. I mean,
and even I don't listen to it daily, right? But like I have moments, where I'll listen to it, but it being there, and so I guess one of the things that's really important is less the fact that that the stuff exists, but whether or not your average person knows who to connect to access it, or how to get to it, right? So like I think one thing about the Vietnamese diaspora is it's not a disconnection of knowledge per se. I don't think that. I mean, I talked to a lot of older Vietnamese people. It's not like they know more than me about Nhạc Vang at this point, right? But I think one thing that is lost is the knowledge of who to go to. Like if you talk to an old Vietnamese person, they don't know something about the music, but they'll tell you should call this guy. This guy, he'll remember it. Or you should call this woman, like she'll remember it. And they have that knowledge, which is even more important than the actual archive in and of itself. Now, there's a clock on it, right? Because everyone's dying, right? Yep. But that is where like I'm a naturally introverted person, but the one thing that will make me go out there and talk to old Vietnamese people is knowing that like somewhere out there is the goods, and if I don't figure out where the goods are by talking to people, then even if they are still there, no one would know where to get them, right? So that's kind of the motivating factor. And I think like for Jimmy too, like that dude is like racing, like he's like the Flash racing across time.
Yeah, I am. He's definitely an inspiration for me. He focuses more on entertainment, but I'll go across the spectrum as long as it has to do with Vietnamese people throughout the world, past, present, and future. I'll sit and have a long conversation. But what Jimmy does is, he's so niched down with what he does, and he's so good at it. And I recognize that. I've watched so many hours of his stuff. Like Thu Khánh Ly, Kiu Jing, all of these names, and I'm like, why would I even go near that stuff? He brings so much richness to that world. But you know, it's all predominantly in Vietnamese. So
Yeah, it's on Vietnamese, I mean, I think one funny thing is that what Jimmy does is amazing, but also kind of making my own inroads in that world is that these people are profoundly approachable,
yeah,
and a lot of them are super sweet and kind and will give you everything that you asked of them in terms of knowledge and
right, right.
experience and advice. Like Kyu Jing didn't know who I was when I first came to her house, but like she,
Yeah,
you know,
she's
we
a
spent an
very
entire afternoon talking together. She took me out to like lunch, and just gives all of
giving.
herself.
She's
Right?
very
Yeah,
giving.
yeah.
Yeah, she gave me 4 hours on the podcast. I was so
So like,
impressed.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's crazy, and she's will, and I think she's not an exception to in terms of the folks from that generation. Like they're all willing. If you're willing to take the time to interact with them, then they're willing to, like, to give that back to you.
yeah, yeah. You know, I want to talk about the development of pop music as it relates to when pop arrived in Vietnam to today. Uh, yeah, I've always been sort of disappointed with the growth or the evolution of pop music. I just felt like it's just sort of the instrumentation has changed throughout the decades, but I never felt like we moved beyond anything, you know, basic 1 4 5 chords and you know, it's very the same throughout, you know, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And you know, I know you did mention a period that we were stunted there for a bit, but are we growing musically? And what you, I'll go
Mm.
this far. You know, when you look at American music, you know, we have jazz, we have rap, we have, and all of these are definitely linked to the African American struggles. And it's like if you put like a little, you know, something in a oyster shell and it rubs itself and it becomes a pearl. And this sort of like this idea of oppression and slavery in the US created these movements of jazz and of rap. And like you said in the beginning, these are sort of reactions to the time. We as a people have been through a lot of pain, but where is the change and the evolution in our music and the really the outcry of a style change within the music?
So I mean, it's funny that you use the metaphor of a pearl, because of course Saigon was Han Gok Wisdom, like the pearl of the Orient, right? In the old in Indochina time period, right? And part of that was that Saigon was felt even by the French who had taken over, like this is some kind of like cultural phenomenon, this place, right? There's something gathering,
Cool about
and
it.
yeah, like yeah, there's something hip here, right? And they felt it. It's, I mean, like they put their administrative offices in Vietnam, right? Like they felt something cool about Vietnam in that sense. They wanted to be there. Um, but I think one thing we have to do is disentangle our notions of what popular music is, to really get a picture of the richness of popular music. Things change. So let me talk 275 first, because war changes everything, right? And the end of war changed everything. So let's talk up through 75 first. Um, if you look at the development of popular music in Vietnam, it begs the question first: what counts as popular, right? And in ethnomusicology, in a lot in pop music studies in general, like there's a lot of different ways to define it. But I mean, if you just go with the straight sense of it's the music that everyone was listening to, right? Then what was the music that everyone was listening to? Well, the most popular thing that was before like broadcast TV was a real big thing was like gang hak lương. They're just
Right.
like traveling, these
Troops, yeah.
troops just going from town to town, right? So then Gai Lung in the south in particular, all the way up through close to the end there, right? Close to 75 there, are one of the primary ways that music gets out to the populace, literally, right? So then what can we say about the development of the music in those troops, right? And I think one thing you can say is that it developed a lot. It changed a lot in the time from the say early 1900s up through 75. When you were starting out, of course, in the Mekong Delta, what were the traditional instruments? I mean, the game was important, right? The tiba, the ni, those kind of things were important. Um, what is the most important instrument in Gailung today, and starting roughly in the 60s, 50s, 60s? The guitar.
Hmm.
The guitar, usually the electric guitar, like, I mean, like some of them use acoustic guitars, but like largely these dudes were into electric guitars, and they put a pickup in, or they hooked up to an amp, and they carved out the fretboard. So we call it guitar phím lõm. So the fret is carved phím lõm, and they learned to play those guitars in the idiom of Gailung dan Gai Tai Tu, right? That is a major development in terms of, because I think at the very beginning I mentioned that when Zako Huailan moved to becoming to Vongko, right? So it's as it stretched out and became Vongko, it changed its key, right? It changed its mode, and then it stretched out in tempo after that. In that time period, the mode developed further because the guitar has a Western fretboard. So Hơi Vongko ended up having the tones of Western music mixed together with the tones of Hơi Nam and Hơi Oan, right? If you want to play Hơi Oan straight, you got to go and play it on like Dan Kim or Dan Chang, right? Like you can't play Hơi Oan like the way it was like played in like the 30s, right? On a Gailung guitar. So that was a huge development. Our ears changed, like the way that people in the Mekong Delta, for example, heard music and how it should sound, how traditional music should sound, changed. The other thing is Gailung itself. You know what the word Gailung means?
No.
Lung refers to like a long form play or a musical, and Gai means to renovate, as in like Gai Dao or Gai Kek, all those words, right?
Got it. Yeah.
So Gai Lung means the renovated opera, the renovated musical drama. Why? Because it arose out of genres that were more like hat boy. I don't know, you're saying like hat boy, or it looks like Peking opera, right? Out of genres like that, but intersecting with French drama's realism, intersecting with French drama's tendency to go for the kind of inner monologue of its actors and the emotions of the actors and everything. Gai Lung flipped the script on Hat Boy and made it. I mean, Gai Lung doesn't look realist to us.
Yeah, but I get it.
It looks realist compared to Hat Boy.
Boy, yeah.
Right? And so that's another thing. Like that, if you think about an average person in the Delta, the first time they experience Gai Lung, that's a revelation. That is a development.
Blown away. Yeah.
Right? It's completely new. Like all of a sudden you got people crying on stage, whereas before you got people in makeup that looks like they're crying on stage, right? Like, I mean, it makes a big difference. At the same time, the music itself is also changing. There's a tendency to, in Tân Cổ Giao Duyên, to actually bring pop music into the Gai Lung stage, right? And so some of people's favorite Gai Lung music is actually Tân Cổ music, where like it starts with a pop song and ends with Vọng Cổ, right? Like a lot of the music that like people listen to, like Phi Nhung, Mạnh Quỳnh, that crowd, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was really popular with certain people in the diaspora. that was mostly Tanko, It wasn't like straight up Tanka Tatu or like kind of old school Kailung, right? It was the kind of Kailung that was developing in the 60s and 70s where they like took music from the pop genres and then brought it in and then and fused it together with the traditional genres.
A little bit more digestible, huh?
Yeah, I mean, and then that's why you have like crossover artists like Hong Kong back then, right? Like Hong Kong, Mai Lệ Huyên, right? They are like the epitome of that kind of rock cool, the kick don't yak, right? Of that period. That dude decides to cross over, and where does he cross over to? He crosses over back into Kailung,
Interesting.
right? Because Kailung is the other popular music. It's like Taylor Swift going back and forth between country music and pop, right? Like country music is its own pop, and the only reason, but we recognize that the only reason we don't recognize Gailung as pop is in part, I think, because of the westernization of our minds.
Correct.
Right?
It's
like,
context, right?
Yeah, like we have internalized Orientalism that exotic things from Asia are old, so much so that we can't see that they are new. And Gailung was new. Like in the 50s and 60s and 70s, before that it barely even existed. I want to say Gailung really became a thing in the 40s. I don't remember the exact dates, but it definitely didn't exist in the 20s. So like it's up to 75, then you have this new thing. Then after that, the problem, of course, is with any group of people who consider themselves refugees, the preservation of what you have takes precedence over creating something new. And you can't fault anybody for that, right? You can't fault anyone running from a war, anyone who thinks that they're about to die, anyone who left their country behind and
they're really holding on.
Who just want to eat some gang chua and listen to some Gailung, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's all they want. So, and you can't fault them for that. So obviously, right after 75, things just stop. In Vietnam, they stopped politically. Like Vietnam could have chosen to continue to kind of make more popular music, but they were mostly making propaganda music.
Yeah.
Right? Until I would say the mid 80s, things started to pick up in terms of a pop music canon of their own over there. But for the diaspora, we were making new music, but it always had to remind us of something. It was very hard to make new music for, I think, if you think about all of the musicians in the diaspora who are still composing, Lam Plung, for example, right? He recently passed.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about some of his songs. His songs written after 75 sound like his songs written before 75. I don't mean that in a bad sense. And in some sense, like I mean, like the context is different, and the texts have to do with like being in Paris or being in America or whatever, right? So the imagery and the metaphors, they change, but like the idiom and the genre that he's working in, very similar to before that. But who can fault him, right? Maybe, yeah. And so I think that's kind of my struggle always, is like, on one level, as a young person, like, I really wish you guys made something new. But on another level, I'm like, what do I blame you for it?
Yeah.
Right? Now, on a different note, though, there was a constant effort to try to make something cool for us. It just never hit. Right?
Stuck. Yeah, never stuck.
Yeah, like, so like, I mean, I like Trish Tweet Chang. She was a moment, right?
Trish from Asia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
She was a moment.
She was our Taylor Swift at the time.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, she wrote her own songs.
She wrote her own songs, and then you had like Cardin that came in.
Asia 4, baby.
Yeah, Asia 4. Then you had Henry Chuk and Chosen. You had all these guys that came in and tried to.
They tried.
Yeah. They gave it the best, and Asia gave them a platform. Paris by Night gave them a platform.
Yeah.
You're right. We as a diaspora didn't really take the bait. There was.
Well, and I will say this. it's hard to take the bait when you don't speak Vietnamese anymore.
That's true. Yeah. Or
Like,
you don't connect to the original, mother source.
yeah, like if there's not something constantly feeding the diaspora, then the diaspora will in and of itself become diluted. I don't mean that in like some kind of value laden sense where like
Yeah.
it's worse because of it. It's just
Different.
like some of the Indian communities, like in like South Africa, I think, right? They don't consider themselves Indian anymore, even though they keep a handful of Indian traditions, because like they in that sense are fully African, right? And they don't feel a need to go back to India regularly or whatever. Um, and I think about that a lot for the diaspora. When you think about, say, Koreans, for example, and their ability to constantly go back to Vietnam or go back to Korea and and just kind of get re-energized on the kind of cultural production,
Yeah.
right, of the homeland. um, we are not at this stage where that is comfortable across the board. I mean, like all of us are worried about getting like jukmu all the time, right? So like, so
I mean, that's becoming less and less of a concern as we're, a lot of us are going back constantly. But that issue
but
of,
existentially, like, so it's like, yeah, I've gone back to Vietnam, but there's still some like level where you feel disconnected because
yeah, sure.
over that 30 years or 40 years or however it was since your family last went back to Vietnam, like you don't know anything about the country. It's not the same as if you were continuously going back every 5-10 years or whatever.
We are now on our third generation here in the US with third generation Vietnamese. And I think that many of us have become like the Indians in South Africa, like you were describing, and not like the Koreans that you're describing.
Yeah.
I wonder if we ever are, and I thought I mean, is it important? But are we ever going to move in the directions of the Koreans? Or are we moving more in the directions of the Indians in South Africa?
I think that it would be a mistake to make that prediction for everyone. I do think in general, we're more likely to become more diluted in our kind of cultural connections to Vietnam than not. But I think the fact that Vietnam exists and that Vietnam in some ways is kind of becoming a cultural center of its own with its own kind of hip circles and spheres provides a connection for future young people. So like, I mean, like one of the things I think about for my daughter, for example, is I speak Vietnamese to her as much as I can, but I have even less of like a there's even less chance of her keeping Vietnamese than there was for me when my parents were trying to raise me in
for
Winston-Salem, right? And that's just the way it is, right? But one thing that I hope for her that will be different is that my parents, and I think most parents of our generation, didn't make it clear what the context of our connections to those sources were, and they didn't support us when we did try to make those connections, right? Whether they were wrong or correct or right. So what I mean by that is like when a young, like kind of 1.5 second generation and from say like go back to when we're like the 2000s, right, for us, right? And like when we're trying to figure out what our relationship to Vietnam is, what was the most likely thing to happen? It would just get shut down.
They didn't even ever address it. It was so
exactly
painful. Maybe
it would just never come out, right?
Yeah.
And so I can say on that level, I'm thankful for what my parents have done, but I can say one thing that I can probably hope to do better than them on is that my kid is going to have a sense that Vietnam is there and there's a lot of like tensions there, but I'm going to be willing to talk through those tensions with her, right?
Yeah.
And that the Cộng đồng here, like that if she goes down to Quận Cam, things are going to be a little bit weird in certain ways. Like she goes into Little Saigon and goes on Bolsa. Some people she can talk to a certain way, some people she can talk to a different way. And I'm going to be able to express those things to her, right? And express to her the values of different parts of the community, the things that are sticking, the things that are conflicts, the things that are resonant, in ways that, because of trauma, because of the need to assimilate, because of, they had to make paper too, right? I mean, like all those kind of things, they did not do or were not willing to do at the time. Hopefully we would be able to do.
Well, Jason, I had a wonderful time talking to you today. There's probably a lot more stuff. I think the next time that you and I should come back to an episode is if there's another phenomenon like Rap Viet in Vietnam that comes out, because I kind of missed that boat, and I wish I kind of was paying attention and followed along. I don't know how well versed you are with that genre, but maybe we can get on another episode and we can just focus, hey, let's both binge it. I haven't watched it. And then we can just talk about it, because I think it's related to obviously ethnomusicology, but it's also related to our passion for music, and it's related to American, music from the ghettos and the hood here. And now it's like being transplanted in Vietnam. I think that would be a cool next episode to do in a few months or, this year.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the kind of worldwide hip hop movement has things that are complicated that I would love to dissect.
Yeah, I want to devote like a whole episode just talking about Rap Viet, because that is something that I am, I've stood from afar to kind of like hear about it and think about, but I want to consume it, I want to binge it, and then I want to talk about it.
I mean, dude, it's been around long enough now that there's a kind of like elder class, right? I mean, there's like old school Rap Viet now, right? So like, we will have a lot to listen to catch up.
Yeah, have you seen the show?
I haven't seen the show yet. But I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, we can watch it on YouTube. I think that's something that I've been really wanting to do. So I'll give ourselves a few months to do it. And if you ever reach out to me and say, hey, let's start it now, and then in a month, like this is something that's important for both of us. I think it's an important conversation for the both of us, because I think in the diaspora, I mean, how many guys are talking about Rap Viet? I have some friends that are, my age, that are like culturally, keeping in touch with all these things. But I think for you and I went to music school for a year for vocal training. So, and I studied with Tai Tang and Duy Khanh for about a year.
Oh, wow.
Tai Tang for 2 years, and in Duy Khanh. That's how I was able to learn Vietnamese, really.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Studying with those guys, or, God bless both of them. They're both not with us anymore, but huge influence in my musical sort of understanding. I mean, I'm not anywhere at your level, but I have a sense of sort of where this has been and where it's going.
Awesome. Yeah. I really appreciate you having me on the show, and it's been fun to just rap about everything.
Yeah, it really is. And we're just getting started. I think the Vietnamese, we are amplifying our voices. All right, Jason, we will talk very soon, and thanks again.
All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right, talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran and Javier Proenza. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcasts. Thanks again for listening.